This is the Atari 8-bit podcast.
We sneered at Turbo Pascal because it was non-compliant. It had, there were all of these unpure features of Turbo. And he just looks at me and he goes, "Nobody gives a damn."
This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. Tom Eckmann was president and co-founder of Kyan Software. Kyan's flagship product was Kyan Pascal, an implementation of the Pascal programming language, which was available for the Apple II, Atari 8-bits, and Commodore 64 and 128 computers. This interview took place on May 19, 2017.
Went to school at University of California at Berkeley and was majored in engineering and got my bachelor's and master's there. And then went into consulting and spent probably 10 or 12 years working for a variety of, a couple of different consulting firms, but worked in a lot of different companies and lots of different projects, mainly in operations and systems and the like. And along the way there, kind of got I'd worked with a number of startup companies in Silicon Valley and kind of got that entrepreneurial bug and started a company to sell. There was a whole new generation of consumer electronic products that were being developed and coming to market, and it really wasn't a distribution channel for them. And so I thought it was a product that was going to require something different than a traditional retail environment to sell these, because they required a lot of consumer education. And,
Can you give some examples of the kind of companies, kind of products you were looking at?
Yeah, well, this was one of the very early home control and communications systems. So it was actually a division of Dart and Craft, and I got connected with them when I was working for Arthur D. Little in San Francisco. And this was a very early wireless home security. It's pretty common now. But, this was back in the early 80s, and this was all pretty revolutionary stuff.
Like X10, that kind of thing?
Yeah, right. The X10 was out there, and X10 would, communicate over the your home electricity system. These would do that, but we were doing some of the early wireless communications, between sensors, and actually pioneering some of the very early single-chip microprocessors at that point. And as I say, it was brand new technology. It was enabling a lot of new products. And so this company that we first consulted with and then had worked with directly was manufacturing a new line of these. And so anyway, there was just no place, the expected place to sell these would be, the consumer electronics department in a department store when those things existed. But again, they required a level of expertise in consumer education that just wasn't available. So I thought there was a business opportunity there. And so that was the first company that I had started. And I always call that my PhD in the humilities, because I thought I was a pretty smart guy, and that this thing was going to be fabulously successful. And it just turned out we were probably about 15 years too early. So it was a first good lesson in entrepreneurship. So anyway, then I ended up going to work for that company that was manufacturing those products. And a couple of years into that, it was actually a partner in that earlier business came to me and said, "Gee, I'm working with a couple of guys, and we've got an idea for a product. It's a language compiler, a Pascal compiler, and we'd like to start up a company to kind of take that to market." And so, my contribution, in many of the startups, I've done half of the startups on my own. It's rarely been, that I was the one that came up with the idea or the technology. I've always kind of been the business guy, that people would come to and say, can you help us put together a company and take these products to market? And so with Kyan, that was the situation there. And the idea was this was going to be a true Pascal compiler that would, go from a high level Pascal language into actual machine code. And what made the product kind of unique was that it was actually an ISO compliant Pascal, and so and that didn't really matter as it turned out to too many people. But we were pretty proud of it.
Nice.
But it was but the main focus was on the education market, and and I think the first product that we rolled out was for the Commodore. We would run on the Commodore 64 and 128, and then we realized that this product could actually run on I think it was the 6502 Motorola processor, and so that allowed us to move over to the Atari as well as to the Apple II, and the primary market was the education market. And
nice.
So anyway, we said, well, and I thought that sounded like an interesting opportunity, and so we kind of put it together and developed the first iterations of the product. And
were you familiar with Pascal before this? I mean, were you a programmer? Had you had any experience?
No, actually, I'd had some, going through 6 years of engineering at Berkeley. I'd certainly done some. But was not dealing in a language like Pascal. It was a much more fundamental, more basic type programming. And so I would say no, I was not a programmer, but I understood certainly the basics of the concepts. And so anyway, but the guys I was working with, one was a PhD in physics, and one guy was a coder, and then there was a guy who specialized in technical documentation, and so that was kind of the basic team. And so put this together. It was kind of a different world. This was in the mid '80s, and there was no internet, obviously. And so when you talk about marketing a product like this, and it's it's cost prohibitive to go out and when you're selling into the school markets, it's very, very expensive to go out and call directly on these schools, and it's a very long sales cycle to get your product into those schools. And so the primary way you promoted the product was to run ads in the computer magazines at that point. So it was. I'm trying to think of some of the names. Commodore had their magazines. Atari had its magazines, and as well as Apple. And so you ended up, and these were monthlies, and so you'd buy an ad. The ads were pretty pricey. You'd spend $1,000, $2,000 on an ad, and one ad doesn't get you there. You got to have a continuing presence, and over time you can get the product reviewed, and then maybe after a year or two, you can start to get the schools where you send out demo copies. Maybe they'll start to adopt it, in some of the programming curriculum. And so that's kind of what happened. And so it grew kind of slowly, and we never had any capital, so the whole company was bootstrapped, and every dime in sales we got, and it wasn't an expensive product. I think it sold for $69, and we had a couple of other products that sold for a little less. So to generate any significant working capital, you had to sell a fair amount of software. And that was always kind of the challenge. So I guess we just kind of sales would kind of grow a little each month, but then we started getting more closely tied in with Apple, and of course Apple is a much bigger company. They were well established in the education market, and so they liked what we were doing. They had a version of Pascal, but they weren't really happy with it, and, liked ours much more. And so they started to fold it into their product line. And then and this was the Apple IIe at this point that was being sold into the schools. Then they decided that they were going to introduce the upgrade to that product, and I can't remember the designation, the 2G or something like that.
2GS.
And 2GS, okay. And so they said, listen, we'd like you to write an enhanced version of your product, and that'll be our primary Pascal offering. And so we did that. We developed that product, and they had also, and this was kind of interesting. At that point, the Macintosh had just been introduced at that time, and people were kind of saying, wow, there's a lot of, interesting capabilities about that, particularly the user interface, and that you were starting to use a mouse to navigate on the screen. There were, drop-down menus, and so from a programming standpoint, what was needed was there were just basic capabilities that were going to be needed in any kind of program you developed. And so for us, somebody who wanted to write an application in Pascal, they would need, they say they'd need a Windows module, they'd need a mouse module to understand, where that cursor was on the screen. And, and rather than having each, programmer have to go out and reinvent that module, Apple kind of developed these basic modules. And so what we did is license those from Apple and repurpose them for the Atari and the Commodore. And this was really kind of the very early phases of the object-oriented programming language, which is very common today. In fact, I'm sure that the languages have moved far beyond that. But what it did is it gave us a fairly robust product offering for people who wanted to program. But again, it was the education market, and anytime you start a new company, there's a huge learning curve. You think you go into it thinking you know a lot, and after a while you get disabused of that idea, pretty quickly. And in this case, it was as I say, it was very hard to get it into the market. There were probably the biggest competition, and it was more on the PC, which we weren't running on, but if you were looking at people who wanted to program, there were a lot of people, on PCs, and it was Turbo Pascal from Borland.
Sure.
Came out right about that time, and I always used to. In fact, I remember sitting at this was the pretty early days of the computer developers in Silicon Valley, and so I remember being part of that. I think it was the Palo Alto Software Club or something, and you'd you go to a dingy motel in East Palo Alto for, a little banquet room, and there's 30 or 40 guys that are, starting up companies, some a little bigger, some smaller. But I remember sitting at the table one day with Philippe Kahn, who was the founder of Borland, that did Turbo Pascal.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we sneered at Turbo Pascal because it was non-compliant. It had, there were all of these unpure features of Turbo. And so I'm extolling the virtues of Kyan and how we're ISO compliant and all of that. And, and he looks at me, and I can't begin to replicate his French language, but he just looks at me and he goes, "Nobody gives a damn." And he was quite, and he was quite right. People wanted to get a job done. They really weren't that concerned with the purity of the language and the fact that if ours ran, 10-15% faster, that's fine. But theirs was it was easier to use and got the job done. So anyway, it was an interesting few years. We spent a lot of money and in advertising, and this is learned another lesson that frequently happens if you start a company, which is you wake up one morning and you look around and you say, well, I've got employees and they're getting paid, and I've got vendors and they're getting paid, and everybody was happy, and the customers were generally happy, but the only people who weren't happy were the founders, because we weren't getting paid. And there really wasn't a good prospect for ramping the sales up unless we could really get an infusion of capital and really start to develop the sales end of it. And at that point, there really wasn't much in the way of capital available. The venture capital industry as we know it today just didn't exist. There were very few people out there. And of those, very, very few invested in software, particularly the little startups like ours, in a little niche market. And so it was a bit of a struggle. And I guess it was about that time that Apple said, "Gee, we developed a new version of for their latest Apple II platform, And they said, listen, we just like to buy this and make this our product. And so they basically bought the company at that point. And of course, they weren't interested in the Commodore or the Atari versions of it. So
Sure.
we basically sold that off to a fellow who would do that. But he wasn't in a development mode at that point. It was really just sell the product and answer support calls.
Mm-hmm.
And that went on for a couple of years from there. But it was an interesting experience, and a lot of lessons learned. And I guess one of my favorites that I cite often is that we had. I'll go back to the fact that we were ISO compliant, and to ensure that we went to Europe and bought a test suite that was actually designed to run on much larger mainframe computers. Mm-hmm. And we're able to reduce that and put it on one of the very early hard drives and use that as our testing platform. Every time we went in and enhanced the product, we would run it through this suite that would not only tell us it was ISO compliant, but would identify any bugs that we would have introduced. So we were pretty proud of that. But despite all of that testing and all that good work we were doing, I noticed that we were getting more and more support calls. And I would hire college students to come in and work the phones for support calls. And it's funny because these guys would come in and these guys were hackers. They were guys who loved to program, and they were just so excited the fact that for something that they would otherwise do for free, I would actually pay them to do. And so they enjoyed doing that. But I noticed again that the calls kept coming out, that we were getting more and more calls. They were lasting longer. And so one day I decided I got to get on the phones here and just figure out what's going on. And then to make a long story short, it was, again, our market was students and a lot of high school students. Well, they'd get a homework assignment, and and they'd do their coding, and then they'd run it, and it wouldn't work. And of course, their first reaction was, well, obviously there's a bug in the compiler. and so they'd call our numbers, and then my guys were they were so oriented toward helping them that they'd sit there and do their homework for them, and basically debug their programs. And I realized that this was not a scalable model. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, at that point, then we decided, listen, we're going to have them mail in their code, and then put a little time lag between the time they get answers to their questions and when they call. So.
Wow.
So anyway, that's kind of in a nutshell the Kyan story. To say it was fun while it lasted, but it was and I find it just fascinating that there's still people using it today.
Yes, there are. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what year did you sell off to Apple?
I think that was in '86. So we started it very late in '83. I think we got it started. So '84, '85, we were getting it ramped up, and then in '86 we were doing a lot of work. I mean, Apple just kind of dominated everything, which was fine because we were able to take a lot of stuff they were doing and license it and make it available on the Commodore and Atari. Mm-hmm. And then Apple was very, they just bent over backwards. They really, made a lot of early developers be able to exist at all, because they would just rain down on us equipment at virtually no cost, all the latest software they'd licensed us, the stuff that was still in the labs. They hosted us at, I think it was the Consumer Electronics Show at that point, and later at Comdex. Where they'd have a huge booth, and then they would put little kiosks and allow the small developers who otherwise, couldn't afford to go to those shows, a chance to get in and show our products. But it was, we became very Apple focused at that point.
So was before they bought you, was of the Atari, the Commodore, the Apple, was the Apple II the majority of your education sales? Yeah, it started to dominate because, again, they were so dominant in the schools, and so the fact that they were recommending the product certainly encouraged people to sell. Where there weren't as many Ataris and Commodores in the school, so it's more the student hobbyist market. Right.
So,
What were the names of the other guys who you started the company with?
well, I was trying to think of that before your call, and Tom Slade was my partner for my previous business, and he was probably the main technical guru behind it. And then Ted and I can't even remember his name. As often happens, you just kind of lose touch with people over the years, and this was 30 some odd years ago now.
Sure. Yeah.
But I know I'm sure they've gone on to have great careers, but we don't talk anymore, and we've all gone in our separate ways.
Yeah. All right. So you had the Pascal product for at least those three platforms that we've talked about. I know on the Atari side, you had something called the Advanced Graphics Toolkit, which doesn't really seem to have. Can you tell me about that? It doesn't really seem to exist out there anymore.
Yeah, well, these again were modules, and those were actually developed. The core modules were developed by Apple, and but we took those and just repurposed them. We licensed and repurposed them and put them out for the Atari and the Commodore. But these were again these modules so that people wouldn't have to. They could embed those in their package in their applications and not have to reinvent that code.
Nice. Do you remember any other modules or just any other products that you guys had?
Yeah, we did late in the company, and we kind of set it aside. It was basically, looking at the success that the Macintosh was starting to see. We wanted to put a more of a graphical user interface. I was thinking, can we develop, something like try to replicate that Macintosh user interface on an Apple II, but then ultimately transport it to the other computers. We got that. We marketed it a bit, but it really never took off. It was just a product that. It was there because it was intriguing. It was a product we developed because it was very intriguing to us. But again, I think pretty early and never really got any traction. Mm-hmm. So, and by that time, to say the founders and the prime movers were losing steam, because you only work so long for nothing, and if you don't see a bright light at the end of the tunnel, then you kind of interest flags.
So you said this idea was brought to you by your co-founders. They came to you with Pascal, but I'm curious, do you know why Pascal, and was the language of choice and not BASIC or C or something else?
Well, that's a good question, and I don't really know the answer. At the time, I think they had one of the fellows just had a real interest in Pascal and being able to, and I'm not sure it was a passion for Pascal as much. It was a passion for a higher level language to implement it on these small microprocessors. And I don't know specifically why he chose Pascal. And I'm trying to think. I think C was in its infancy at that point. So Pascal was a little more mainstream. Mm-hmm. I think C, and I'm very divorced from this now, but I believe C was actually a language that started to, in the language itself, incorporate some of these modules that we were selling as add-ons.
Right.
They were actually part of the compilers. Yeah.
Does the name Kyan have any particular meaning?
No, not at all. I can't even remember where it came from. Other than it was pretty unusual, and I don't even have the excuse that we were able to get the URL for it. It's usually what drives company names today.
Sure.
So I bet it's still available, actually. But I don't know. So obviously one of the guys came up with it. I didn't. And at that point, it didn't really matter too much to me what we called it.
Sure.
So just get it to market.
So did you feel that being at the trade shows was important? You said that Apple got you into some of the shows. Did that end up being a big, important thing for your sales and just getting noticed out there?
Yeah, I think it may have helped a little. The fact that we could, it gave us some bragging rights. the reality is that these shows were so enormous. You get back then you get 100,000, 120,000 people showing up. We were such a minute part of it that if anybody, the chances were better that they would find us because the fact that we were a part of that Apple enclave, people would check us out. As opposed to trying to buy a booth and you'd be way in some, 3 buildings out of the main center.
Right, in the sub-basement, right.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Which when I would go to those shows wearing other hats, I would always go to those places first because that's where I found the most interesting companies, the people who were really doing some breakthrough work.
Yeah.
But we did get some traction, but I don't know that it really converted into much in the way of sales. So.
Sounds like the magazine advertising was where it was at.
That was the primary driver, and then trying to get distribution and get into some of the again there weren't that many software stores, but to get on the shelf these and up in Seattle, I'm trying to think. I can't remember the name of the retail chain, but it was it was Kyan Software. It was one of the very early software retail chains.
Mm-hmm.
We were able to get in, get some distribution, but again, even that was tough. Unless, it's one thing to get on the shelf in a retail environment, but that's rarely enough. You need to have people come in and really give them a reason to find you. In these large stores that have all the software on the shelf, so you need something to create the pull. And again, that was kind of one of the frustrating things. We just didn't have the capital to do that.
Yeah.
So.
How many employees did you have? At your maximum?
I think we were. I want to say 7 or 8. We had 4 founders, so it was actually more than that. We had. I think we had about 5 or 6 employees plus the 4 founders who were not working full time in the business at that point. I was working full time, but the others had day jobs. So, but and I think only one of those employees was full time, other than me, and they were. But we were hiring mainly college kids out of the University of San Francisco.
Right.
They were in majoring in computer science, and so they'd come in and work afternoons or evenings, and we were operating all of this out of my. The top floor of my Victorian in San Francisco. So it was pretty funky. I remember the time when we started getting really close with Apple. They sent out one of their and Apple has always been very big on secrecy, as I'm sure you know. That they sent out their security people to kind of tour our premises to make sure they were safe enough for them to give us unreleased hardware and software that they were developing. And they pull up to this house and they can't quite make any sense out of this. And then I escort them up to the 3rd floor of the Victorian, and they're this was unusual back then. Today, nobody'd think twice about it.
Sure. Do you still have any old hardware? An Apple or an Atari or anything?
No. All that stuff, kind of got sold off when we did those transactions. And,
sure.
But I've actually went back and looked. I don't even have any of the source code.
That was my next question. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, and I wish I could say I did, but I don't, and I don't think. As I say, if I had it, I wonder if we could find any hardware to access it.
No, I'm sure we could find a way to get at the data if we had the data, but that's
right.
That's the easy part.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll keep looking. I've got a lot of stuff stashed away, but as I say, I've done a little looking. I'm not optimistic that there's any there.
Sure. All right. So, tell me a story about those days that we haven't struck on yet. Maybe it was some interaction with a customer that sticks in your mind, or I'm just fishing now. Just tell me a story.
Yeah. Trying to think. I've kind of told you a few of the kind of key ones. They were, again, I guess back in those days, having, number one, just working out of your home was unusual. You had to kind of hide it, because the phone company, they didn't even want you to have they wanted you to have business lines, which cost dramatically more than residential lines. So so you want to get phones run in, and it's and they're wondering why in this residence do you have 5 residential lines coming in, and and you couldn't have UPS come and pick up and deliver to the house, because then you were a business in a residential neighborhood, and so you had to go through all these little subterfuges to get a not even a PO box, but one of the rental boxes to as your official address, and disk duplication was a real hassle, because everybody was the major disk duplication companies, and there were these whole companies, that's all they did is produce software disks. Mm-hmm. But unless you wanted to do a couple thousand in a run, they were very expensive. And so we went out, and I sourced a company that made it ran off an Apple II, but it would actually allow you to duplicate with some speed the 5 1/4-inch floppies that we were shipping the product on at that point. And these were just big clunky machines. They probably weighed 40 or 50 pounds each, and you set them up, and while the guys were handling support calls, they'd be slipping discs we'd buy raw discs, slip labels on them, put them into this machine, and take 2-3 minutes for them to to create a disc. And it was kind of funny to watch the guys bouncing between phone calls and disc duplication and stuffing envelopes and shrink wrapping these things. And as I say, it was just kind of a little different world. Today I teach, actually about the last 10 years, I taught innovation and entrepreneurship at the University of Washington in the business school. And, one of the things I comment on is how much easier it is today to start a company. And because you've got, you've got the internet, you've got all of these online services that are available. You don't have to go out and buy a phone switch. You don't have to go out and spend the thousands and tens of thousands of dollars that you did back then to start a business, just to to get out of the garage. And but back then everything was a whole lot harder and comparatively more expensive than it is today.
Is that your main thing now, the teaching?
Yeah. I started, between Kyan and my last company, which I exited in 2008, a very memorable time in our economy. That's a whole other story, but unsoftware related. But I decided I'd done enough startups, and but by then I'd actually started doing some part-time teaching, and so the university asked me to join the faculty to come in and kind of bring the real life side of what it's like. There's the academic side, and then there's the real life side of starting a company. And so through that, we've the university has a 20-year program. In fact, this is the 20th year that of business plan competitions. And so a lot of what I did is taught classes focused on on developing business plans, entering these competitions, and then mentoring the student teams. And it's actually turned into a big deal. We give away about $125,000 in prizes. In fact, next week is the finals for this year. And I think about 1,300 companies or student teams have gone through the process, and out of that, probably I think there's 80 or 90 companies that were formed as a result of this and still exist.
Nice.
So, yeah, so that kind of is in lieu of me starting up another company, which I decided is just way too much work, and it kind of keeps those entrepreneurial juices and excitement going.
Sure.
So I enjoy it.
You say it's way too much work, but you also just said it's so much easier than it used to be.
Well, that's true. Yeah. But I don't want anybody to think it's easy to start a company. All you've done is move the bar, a little lower on one end, but it's higher on the back end. I mean, now there's so much, particularly in the software side, it's all apps, and I know I work with a lot of student teams who think, well, I've got the app done, I just got it into the the Apple Store, And so I'm done. I'm just going to wait for the phone to ring and the dollars to start flowing.
Right.
And, it's just kind of, well, okay, now you're one of, I don't know what the number is now, 1 million or more. How do you get attention? And now you've got to go out there and figure out how do you make money doing this? And don't talk to me about banner ads. That's 95% of the business plans are going to fund themselves off banner ads. And but how are you? What problem are you solving? How are you going to find customers? How are you going to get them to pay you something to make it worthwhile? So you don't go through my experience, which is you wake up one day and you're making a little money, but not enough to make it worthwhile. The opportunity cost just becomes greater than anything you're doing.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, back when you were making Pascal, I mean, if someone wanted to learn Pascal or program in Pascal, there was, maybe 3 or 4 choices total for them, and they picked one of them based on the merits. And now, I mean, you put an app, and there might be literally 500 or 1,000 things that do almost exactly the same thing. And how do you compete with that? Yeah.
Yeah. How do you compete? How do you get noticed? And most importantly, how do you get paid?
Right. Yeah.
So it's interesting times.
So if you could...
what I found is that and again I'm in semi-retirement at this point, and but so much of the technology has just moved beyond. I mean, I'm not talking apps now, where everything, I'm the Airbnb for this, or I'm the Uber for that, or but people really doing substantive technology plays. This technology is so complex that I used to pride myself on keeping up in a number of different fields. You just can't do it anymore. There's too much going on, and it's very sophisticated stuff that people are doing.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. All right. So, if you could send a message to the Atari and Commodore and Apple users who use your software and they still exist and they're listening to this interview right now, what would you tell them?
Well, God bless you for hanging in there. It's really actually very gratifying to know that work we did way back then that wasn't perhaps wasn't all that financially successful for the founders. It has found good use and provided value to people, and that I say there's nice gratification there, and I appreciate you reaching out and giving me the opportunity to talk about it, because it's a lot of that I had not thought about in a whole long time, 30 plus years. So.
Nice. Well, this is great. Thank you so much, Tom.
Okay, Kevin. Thank you.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute, there are 2 ways you can help. You can help fund these interviews directly by contributing to my Patreon. A small monthly contribution will help offset the expenses of making these oral history interviews. Contribute at patreon.com/Savitz. Or make a tax-deductible contribution to the Internet Archive, a nonprofit digital library that has done incredible things to preserve computer history. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate. Thanks.